Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Life-Changing True Stories. Today I bring you a powerful and deeply loving story. Astris Califera Bennett pressed her trembling fingers against the hospital window. Watching her father sleep in the sterile white room, tubes and wires connected him to machines that beeped steadily, monitoring every fragile breath. The doctors had been clear. Without the experimental surgery, he had maybe 2 months left. With it, he could have years. But the surgery cost $400,000. And Califera barely made enough working at Riverside Books to cover rent on her tiny studio apartment. She was 26 years old, plain by most standards. With light brown hair she usually wore in a practical ponytail, and hazel eyes that reflected every emotion she felt. Her father had raised her alone after her mother died, giving birth to her, and he had given her everything. He worked 3 jobs to send her to community college, never complained, never asked for anything. Now it was her turn to save him, but she had no idea how. The social worker had gently suggested fundraising campaigns, medical loans, charity organizations. Califera had tried them all. She was $17,000 short even after maxing out every credit card, selling everything she owned, and setting up donation pages that barely reached a few hundred people. Time was running out, and desperation was turning into despair. When she returned to her apartment that evening, exhausted and hollow, she found an envelope slipped under her door. Expensive paper, cream-colored, with her name written in elegant script. Inside was a business card for Preston Blackwood, founder and CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, one of the most powerful real estate development companies in the country. Below his name was a handwritten note. "I have a proposal that could solve your financial crisis. Meet me at Luciano's restaurant tomorrow at 7 o'clock. Come alone." Califera's hands shook as she held the card. Preston Blackwood was a name everyone knew. His face appeared regularly in business magazines, always with the same cold, calculating expression. He was 34, devastatingly handsome in a harsh way, and famously ruthless. Why would someone like him contact someone like her? She had never even met him. The next evening, Califera wore her only decent dress, a simple navy blue piece she had bought for job interviews years ago. Luciano's was the kind of restaurant where a single appetizer cost more than her weekly grocery budget. She felt completely out of place as the hostess led her to a private room in the back. Preston Blackwood sat at a table set for 2, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost thousands of dollars. He was even more intimidating in person than in photographs. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw sharp and clean-shaven. And his ice blue eyes studied her with an intensity that made her want to run. But she thought of her father's frail body in that hospital bed, and she sat down. "Miss Bennett, thank you for coming," Preston said. His voice was deep and controlled, the voice of someone who was used to commanding rooms full of powerful men. "I'll be direct. I need to get married within the next 6 weeks, and you need money for your father's surgery. I'm offering you a business arrangement." Califera blinked in confusion. "I don't understand." "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Preston replied, sliding a folder across the table. "My grandfather left a trust fund worth $200 million, but there's a condition in his will. I must be married before my 35th birthday to access it. That birthday is in 6 weeks. I need a wife who understands this is purely transactional, someone who won't develop unrealistic expectations. In exchange for 1 year of marriage, I'll pay for your father's complete medical care and give you $2 million when we divorce." The number made Califera dizzy. $2 million. Her father would live. She could go back to school, maybe even open her own bookstore someday. But marriage to a stranger, a cold, arrogant stranger who was making it clear he wanted nothing from her except her signature on a contract? "Why me?" she whispered. "Because you're desperate enough to agree and smart enough not to fall in love with me," Preston answered bluntly. "I've researched you, Califera. You're hardworking, you keep to yourself, you have no social media presence to complicate things, and most importantly, you have a compelling reason to honor the contract. Your father." The cold calculation in his words should have sent her running. But instead she thought about her father's smile, about the bedtime stories he used to read her, about the way he worked himself to exhaustion to give her a good life. Could she really sell a year of her life to save his? "I need 24 hours to think about it," Califera said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. You have 12, Preston countered. My lawyer will call you tomorrow morning with the contract details. If you agree, we'll marry at City Hall the following day. He stood up, the meeting clearly over. As he buttoned his suit jacket, he looked at her with those cold blue eyes. One more thing, Miss Bennett. Don't mistake this arrangement for anything romantic. I don't do love, I don't do affection, and I don't do happy endings. This is business. Keep that in mind, and we'll get through this year without complications. Holofira barely slept that night. She visited her father in the hospital at dawn, watching him struggle to breathe. Watching the machines do the work his failing body couldn't manage anymore. She made her decision. When Preston's lawyer called at exactly 9 o'clock, she accepted the terms. 2 days later, she stood in City Hall wearing a white dress borrowed from her only close friend. Exchanging vows with a man who looked at her like she was a signature on a contract, nothing more. There was no kiss, no celebration, no joy. Just paperwork and Preston's driver taking her to the penthouse apartment where she would live for the next year. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a building Preston owned in the financial district. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Designer furniture filled spaces larger than her entire previous apartment. And everything was decorated in cold grays and blacks. It was beautiful and lifeless, like a magazine photo of a home rather than an actual home. Your room is the second door on the left, Preston informed her, not even looking at her as he checked his phone. My room is on the opposite side of the apartment. We have separate bathrooms. My housekeeper comes 3 times a week. Don't rearrange anything. Where will you be? Holofira asked, setting down the single suitcase that contained everything she owned. Working, Preston replied shortly. I leave at 6 in the morning and return after 11 at night. On weekends, I work from my home office. You're free to do whatever you want, as long as you're available for the occasional public appearance. My assistant will notify you 24 hours in advance. He walked toward his bedroom, then paused. One more thing. Don't wait up for me. Don't make me breakfast. Don't try to play housewife. I hired you to be my wife on paper, not in practice. Stay out of my way, and this year will pass quickly enough. The door to his bedroom closed with a definitive click, leaving Holofira alone in the enormous cold penthouse. She went to her assigned room, which was larger than her entire previous apartment. Beautifully furnished with a king bed, a walk-in closet, and an ensuite bathroom with a soaking tub. It had everything except warmth. That night, lying in the expensive sheets, Holofira cried quietly into her pillow. She had saved her father's life, but at what cost? She was married to a man who treated her like an inconvenience. Living in a beautiful prison, playing a role in a loveless production, the next year stretched ahead of her like a wasteland, empty and cold. What Holofira didn't know was that in his own bedroom across the penthouse, Preston Blackwood lay awake staring at the ceiling, troubled by thoughts he didn't want to examine. She was nothing like he expected. She hadn't cried or argued when he laid out the harsh rules. She simply accepted them with quiet dignity that somehow made him feel like the villain in this arrangement. He pushed the thought away. Feelings were liabilities in business and in life. He had learned that lesson the hard way. And he wouldn't forget it just because his contract wife had sad hazel eyes and a gentle voice. This was business. Nothing more. It had to stay that way. The first 3 weeks of marriage were exactly as cold as Preston had promised. Holofira barely saw her husband except for brief moments when their paths crossed in the hallway or kitchen. He left before dawn and returned after midnight, a ghost in his own home. She spent her days reading, exploring the neighborhood, and video calling her father, who was recovering beautifully from the surgery that Preston's money had made possible. Her father thought she had married for love, and Holofira couldn't bring herself to tell him the truth, despite Preston's warnings. Holofira couldn't help but try to make the penthouse feel less like a museum. She bought fresh flowers for the living room, opened the curtains to let in natural light, started cooking simple meals that she left covered on the kitchen counter in case Preston came home hungry. He never acknowledged these gestures, never said thank you, never indicated he even noticed. But Holofira noticed things about him. She noticed that his coffee cup was always left in the sink, drained to the last drop, which meant he drank the coffee she made each morning before she woke up. She noticed that the meals she left were gone the next day, containers washed and placed carefully back in the cabinet. She noticed the way his shoulders were always tense when he came home late, the way exhaustion lined his face, the way he sometimes stood at the window staring out at the city with an expression of deep loneliness. One evening, Preston's assistant called. "Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Blackwood requests your presence at the Children's Hospital Charity Gala this Saturday evening. A dress will be delivered to you tomorrow. The car will pick you up at 7 o'clock. Holofera's stomach twisted with anxiety. This would be their first public appearance as a married couple, and she would be surrounded by Preston's world of wealth and power. A world where she didn't belong. The dress that arrived was stunning. A floor-length emerald gown that somehow fit her perfectly. When Saturday came, Holofera spent hours getting ready, wanting to at least look the part, even if she didn't feel it. When she emerged from her room, Preston was waiting in the living room, devastatingly handsome in a black tuxedo. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her, and for just a moment, something that looked like appreciation flickered across his face before the cold mask returned. "Look acceptable," he said curtly. "Remember, we're playing the role of happily married couple tonight. Smile. Stay close to me, and don't say anything that could embarrass me." The words stung, but Holofera lifted her chin. "I know how to behave in public, Preston." The gala was held in a historic mansion, transformed into a glittering wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across rooms filled with the city's elite, all dressed in designer clothes and dripping with jewelry. Holofera felt Preston's hand settle on the small of her back. A touch that was purely for show, but still sent an unexpected warmth through her body. They circulated through the crowd, Preston introducing her as his wife to various business people and socialites. Holofera smiled and made polite conversation, relieved that most people seemed kind enough. Then they encountered a group of 3 women who looked at Holofera the way a cat looks at a mouse. "Preston, darling, what a surprise," purred a striking woman with platinum blonde hair and cold green eyes. This was Sienna Vanderbilt, a name Holofera recognized from society pages. "We heard rumors of your sudden marriage, but couldn't quite believe them. You always said you'd never marry." "Plans change, Sienna," Preston replied neutrally. Sienna's eyes raked over Holofera with undisguised contempt. "And who is this charming creature? I don't believe we've met at any of the usual events." "This is my wife Holofera," Preston said, his voice carrying a warning edge. "How exotic," Sienna drawled. "Tell me, dear, what do you do? Besides being Mrs. Blackwood, of course." "I worked at a bookstore," Holofera answered honestly, refusing to be ashamed. The 3 women exchanged knowing looks. "How quaint," one of them said with barely concealed mockery. "A bookstore clerk who landed a billionaire. What a fortunate coincidence. It's quite a fairy tale, isn't it?" The 3rd woman added, her smile sharp as a knife. "Poor girl meets rich man, and suddenly all her problems disappear. I wonder what she offered that was valuable enough to secure such an advantageous marriage." The implication was clear and cruel. They were calling her a gold digger, suggesting she had used her body to trap Preston into marriage. Holofera felt her face burn with humiliation, but she forced herself to maintain composure. "You're right," Holofera said quietly, looking each woman in the eye. "I did get incredibly lucky. Lucky to find someone who values character over status, who measures worth by integrity rather than bank accounts. I'm lucky that I was raised by a father who taught me that true class has nothing to do with money and everything to do with how you treat people. Something the 3 of you clearly never learned." The women gasped, their perfect faces twisting with shock and anger. Before they could respond, Holofera felt Preston's arm wrap around her waist, pulling her firmly against his side. "If you'll excuse us." "Ladies," Preston said, his voice ice cold. "My wife and I have better company to keep than jealous. Bitter women who peaked in their 20s and have been desperately clinging to relevance ever since." He guided Holofera away, leaving the 3 women sputtering behind them. When they reached a quiet corner near the garden doors, Preston turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were intense. "You didn't have to defend yourself to them," he said.
Yes.
"I did," Holofera replied, her voice shaking slightly now that the confrontation was over. "I won't let anyone treat me like garbage, no matter how much money they have." Something shifted in Preston's face. His jaw unclenched slightly, and when he looked at her, it was different from before. Less cold, more curious. "You surprised me tonight." Most people would have crumbled under Sienna's attack. "I'm tougher than I look," Holofera said softly. "I'm beginning to see that." Preston's hand was still on her waist, and neither of them moved to break the contact. "Would you like to get some air?" They stepped out onto a terrace, overlooking manicured gardens lit with tiny white lights. The night air was cool, and Holofera shivered slightly. Without a word, Preston shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was so unexpected, so gentlemanly, that Holofera looked at him in surprise. "Thank you," she whispered. They stood in silence for a moment, and then Preston spoke, his voice lower than usual. "Those women were wrong about you. I know why you married me, and it wasn't for money or status. It was love. Love for your father. That's not something to be ashamed of." Holofera felt tears prick her eyes. It was the kindest thing Preston had said to her since they met. "Why are you being nice to me suddenly?" Preston was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the gardens. "Because watching those women attack you made me realize something. I've been treating you the same way, maybe worse. I've been cold and dismissive, acting like you're an inconvenience rather than a person who made an impossible sacrifice for someone she loves." "You needed a wife for your inheritance," Holofera said. "I needed money for my father. It's just business, like you said. Is it?" Preston turned to look at her, and there was something vulnerable in his eyes that she had never seen before. "Or have I been telling myself that because it's easier than admitting that having you in my home, seeing your flowers in the living room, drinking the coffee you make, eating the meals you prepare, has made me feel something I swore I'd never feel again?" Holofera's heart began to race. "What do you mean?" Preston stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "I mean that I've been a coward, Holofera. 10 years ago, I was engaged to someone I thought I loved. She was from my world, understood the business, seemed perfect. A week before our wedding, I discovered she had been having an affair with my business partner. They had planned the whole thing together, using our marriage to get access to my company's resources. It destroyed me." He paused, his jaw clenching at the painful memory. "I swore I'd never let anyone close again. I built walls so high that no one could climb them. I turned myself into exactly what those magazines call me, a heartless businessman who treats everything like a transaction. It was safer that way." "Preston?" Holofera breathed, her hand instinctively reaching out to touch his arm. "But then you came along," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "You, with your quiet strength and genuine heart. You who never asked for anything, who gave without expecting anything in return. You who looked at me with kindness, even when I treated you terribly. And these walls I built, they started cracking." Holofera felt her breath catch. "What are you saying?" Preston reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I'm saying that somewhere between the cold wedding at City Hall and tonight, this stopped being just business for me. I'm saying that I wake up earlier than I need to, just so I can drink the coffee you make before you see me. I'm saying that I come home at midnight hoping to catch a glimpse of you, even though I told myself I didn't care. I'm saying that watching those women attack you tonight made me want to protect you. Not because you're my contract wife, but because you've become important to me." Tears spilled down Holofera's cheeks. "Preston, I don't know what to say." "Well, give me a chance," he said softly, cupping her face in his hands. "A real chance. Not as part of our contract, but as two people who might be able to find something genuine together. I know I don't deserve it after how I've treated you, but I'm asking anyway." "Yes," Holofera whispered. "Yes, I'll give you a chance." Preston smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face, making him look younger and infinitely more handsome. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Holofera didn't move. When his lips finally met hers, it was gentle and sweet. A kiss that held promise rather than passion, a beginning rather than an ending. When they pulled apart, both were breathing harder, both looking at each other with wonder. "Can we start over?" Preston asked. "Pretend the last 3 weeks didn't happen and begin again. This time, as two people who want to know each other." "I'd like that," Holofera said, smiling through her tears. They left the gala early, driving home in comfortable silence, Preston's hand holding hers the entire way. When they reached the penthouse, he walked her to her bedroom door, kissed her forehead gently, and said goodnight. It wasn't dramatic or passionate. but it was real, and that made it perfect. Over the next several weeks, everything changed. Preston started coming home at reasonable hours. They would have dinner together, talking for hours about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood, about the pressure of living up to his grandfather's legacy, about his dreams and fears. She told him about growing up with a single father, about her love of books, about wanting to make a difference in the world somehow. They went on real dates, to movies and restaurants and art galleries. Preston held her hand in public. Not for show, but because he wanted to. He brought her flowers not as decoration, but as gifts. He made her laugh with dry observations about his business rivals. She made him smile with her gentle humor and optimistic outlook. Halafera found herself falling deeply in love with the man behind the cold exterior. The man who was learning to be vulnerable again. The man who looked at her like she was precious. And Preston found himself falling for the woman who had quietly invaded his fortress heart and made it beat. Again, one night. Exactly 2 months after the gala, they were having dinner on the penthouse terrace under the stars. Preston had cooked, or tried to, creating a meal that was slightly burned, but made with such effort that Halafera found it endearing. After they finished eating, Preston took both her hands in his. Halafera, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. His voice was serious. His eyes locked on hers. I'm listening, she said softly. I love you, Preston said simply. Not because of our contract, not because you're convenient or useful, but because you're you. You're kind and strong and genuine in a world full of fakeness. You see the best in people, including me, even when I didn't deserve it. You've changed my life completely, and I can't imagine going back to who I was before you. Halafera felt her eyes fill with tears again, but these were happy tears. I love you too, Preston. I think I started falling for you that night at the gala when I saw past your walls for the first time. Every day since then, I've fallen a little more. Preston stood up and pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her. I know we still have 10 months left on our contract, but I don't want this to be temporary anymore. I want this to be real, permanent. I want you to be my wife in every sense of the word. I want that too, Halafera whispered against his chest. He pulled back slightly to look at her face. Are you sure? Because if we do this, if we make this real, I need you to know that I'm all in. This isn't a business arrangement anymore. This is my heart, Halafera, and I'm giving it to you. I'm sure, she said firmly. I've never been more sure of anything. Preston kissed her then, and this kiss was different from the gentle one at the gala. This kiss was full of passion and promise of two people who had found each other against all odds and were choosing to hold on tight. That night, Preston led Halafera to his bedroom for the first time. The room was masculine and sleek, but he had added fresh flowers to the nightstand, a gesture that made her heart swell. He was patient and gentle, constantly checking that she was comfortable, that she wanted this. I need to know, Preston said, pausing as they stood beside his bed. Have you ever been with anyone before? Halafera felt her cheeks flush, but she met his eyes honestly. No, I've never been with anyone. I always wanted my first time to be with someone I truly loved, and I'd never felt that way about anyone until you. Preston's entire expression transformed at Halafera's confession. His eyes filled with a mixture of emotions. Surprise, tenderness, and something deeper that made Halafera's breath catch. He cupped her face in his hands with infinite gentleness, looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Halafera, he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. You're giving me something irreplaceable. Do you understand how much that means to me? How much you mean to me? I trust you completely, she whispered, placing her hand over his heart, feeling it beat rapidly beneath her palm. What followed was beautiful and tender. Preston took his time, making sure every moment was filled with love and care. He kissed away her nervousness, whispered words of love and reassurance, and guided her through every new sensation with patience and devotion. When they finally became one, Halafera felt a connection so deep it brought tears to her eyes. This wasn't just physical intimacy. This was two souls joining two lonely people finding home in each other afterwards. They lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the windows, Preston holding Halafera close against his chest, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her skin, He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, unable to stop touching her. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. "Thank you for trusting me, for giving me something so precious. I swear to you, Halafera, I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that gift. I will love you, protect you, cherish you every single day." "You already do," she said softly, snuggling closer to him. "You make me feel safe and loved and valued. You make me feel like I'm exactly where I belong." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and for the first time in 10 years. Preston slept peacefully through the night without nightmares or anxiety. He woke up with Halafera still in his arms, her hair spread across his pillow, her face peaceful in sleep, and felt a contentment he had never known existed. The next few weeks were blissful. They moved Halafera's things into Preston's bedroom, officially sharing the space. They cooked together, laughed together, made love, and talked about their future. Preston even brought Halafera to meet her father, who was recovering beautifully. The older man immediately liked Preston. Seeing past the intimidating exterior to the good man beneath, everything was perfect. Until it went one morning, Preston arrived at his office to find an unexpected visitor waiting. Jonathan Cross, his biggest business rival, sat in the reception area with a smug expression that immediately put Preston on alert. Jonathan ran Cross Industries, a company that competed directly with Blackwood Enterprises for major development projects.
"Oh, Preston?"
"We need to talk," Jonathan said. Standing up and adjusting his expensive suit, "I have nothing to discuss with you, Jonathan." "Please leave," Preston replied coldly. "Not, even if I have information about your convenient marriage." Jonathan pulled out a folder and waved it tauntingly. "I have a copy of your marriage contract, Preston. Every clause, every payment, every detail about how you bought yourself a wife to get your grandfather's inheritance." Preston's blood ran cold. "Where did you get that?" "I have my sources," Jonathan smirked. "And unless you agree to sell me your stake in the Harbor District development, I'm going public with this." Imagine the headlines. "Billionaire Preston Blackwood commits marriage. Fraud to steal inheritance. Your reputation will be destroyed. Your grandfather's will can be contested. And your sweet little bookstore wife will be labeled a gold digger by every media outlet in the country." Preston's hands clenched into fists. The Harbor District development was his crown jewel, a $5 billion project that would transform the waterfront. It represented years of work and planning. But more importantly, if this information went public, it would humiliate Halafera, drag her name through the mud, and destroy what they had built together. "I need time to think," Preston said through gritted teeth. "You have 48 hours, Jonathan said, dropping the folder on the reception desk. "Sell me your stake in Harbor District for 30 cents on the dollar, or I release this to every major news outlet in the city." After Jonathan left, Preston sat in his office, his mind racing. He could give up the Harbor District project, take the massive financial loss, and protect Halafera. Or he could call Jonathan's bluff and risk everything. But it wasn't really a choice, was it? Halafera mattered more than any business deal. That evening, Preston came home earlier than usual, his face drawn and tense. Halafera immediately knew something was wrong. She set down the book she was reading and went to him.
"What?"
she asked, taking his hands. Preston pulled her to sit on the couch and told her everything. He watched her face pale as he explained about Jonathan's blackmail, about the contract being exposed, about the impossible choice he faced. "This is my fault," Halafera said, tears streaming down her face. "If you hadn't made that contract with me, none of this would be happening. You could lose everything because of me." "Stop," Preston said firmly, pulling her into his arms. "This is not your fault. I made that contract willingly. And Halafera, you need to understand something. I'm not losing anything that matters. Harbor District is just a project. It's money and buildings and prestige, but you're everything. You're my heart, my home, my future. I would give up 1,000 projects to protect you." "But you worked so hard on that development," Halafera sobbed against his chest. "And I'll work hard on another one," Preston said, tilting her chin up so she looked at him. "Listen to me, Halafera. Before you came into my life, all I had was work. My company, my projects, my reputation, they were everything because I had nothing else. But you changed that. You showed me what really matters. Love, connection, having someone to share life with. I'm not going to let some business rival destroy what we have together. I'll sell him my stake in Harbor District, take the loss, and move on. Are you sure? Holofera asked, searching his eyes. Completely sure, Preston said firmly. You are worth more than any amount of money, any business deal, any project. You are my priority always. But Holofera saw something flash across Preston's face. A brief moment of pain at the thought of losing his dream project. She loved him too much to let him sacrifice everything for her. That night, after Preston fell asleep, she made a decision. The next morning, while Preston was in the shower, Holofera took his phone and found Jonathan Cross's number. Her hands shook as she called him. Mr. Cross, this is Holofera Blackwood. I need to meet with you today. 2 hours later, Holofera sat across from Jonathan Cross in a coffee shop, her spine straight despite her fear. Jonathan looked amused, clearly wondering what the bookstore girl thought she could do. Mrs. Blackwood? What a surprise. Did Preston send you to beg? Jonathan asked mockingly. No, Holofera said firmly. Preston doesn't know I'm here. I came to make you an offer. Should be entertaining. Jonathan leaned back in his chair. Our marriage started as a contract. That's true, Holofera began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. But it became real. We fell in love genuinely and completely. What you have is a contract that no longer reflects our actual relationship. If you release that information, yes, there will be scandal. But Preston and I will stand together and tell the truth. We'll admit that we married for practical reasons initially, but found real love. People love a good love story, Mr. Cross. You think that will save you? Jonathan scoffed. I think it will make you look like a vindictive bully attacking a love story for business gain, Holofera replied. But more than that. I know things about you too, Mr. Cross. I spent yesterday researching, making calls, talking to people. I know about the building inspector you bribed in 2019 for the Riverside project. I know about the environmental reports you falsified for the Greenway development. I know about the wage theft lawsuits your company settled quietly. Oh. Jonathan's smug expression vanished. You're bluffing, am I? Holofera pulled out her own folder, sliding it across the table. Inside are copies of documents, witness statements, financial records. If you release our contract, I release this to every regulatory agency and news outlet in the state. Preston might face embarrassment, but you'll face criminal investigation. Jonathan's face turned red with fury. You little choose wisely, Mr. Cross, Holofera interrupted, standing up. Leave us alone, and these documents disappear. Come after us, and I burn your company to the ground. I might have been a bookstore clerk, but I know how to research, and I fight for the people I love. All. She walked out of the coffee shop before Jonathan could respond. Her legs shaking so badly she could barely make it to the street. She had gambled everything on a bluff. She had those documents, but whether they were damaging enough to truly threaten Jonathan, she wasn't entirely sure. When she got home, Preston was waiting and he was furious. Jonathan's assistant called me. They said you met with him this morning. What did you do, Holofera? She told him everything. Preston's face cycled through shock, fear, and finally, overwhelming pride. When she finished, he pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. You magnificent, terrifying woman, he murmured into her hair. You faced down a shark to protect me? Do you have any idea how incredible you are? I couldn't let him destroy you, Holofera said. I love you too much. Preston's phone rang. It was Jonathan Cross. Preston put it on speaker, and they listened as Jonathan spoke through gritted teeth. The deal is off, Blackwood. Keep your Harbor District project. But if those documents about my company ever surface, I'll know who to blame. The documents will stay private, as long as you stay away from my wife and my business, Preston replied coldly. We have an understanding? Yes, Jonathan spat, then hung up. Preston and Holofera looked at each other, and then simultaneously burst into relieved laughter, holding each other tight. They had won. Together, they had protected what mattered most, their love and their future. That evening, Preston took Holofera back to the same terrace where he had first confessed his love. The city lights sparkled below them, and the stars shone above. He got down on one knee, pulling out a small velvet box. Holofera, Bennett Blackwood, we're already married, but I want to do this right. I want to ask you properly, not as part of a business contract, but as a man who loves you more than life itself." He opened the box, revealing a stunning diamond ring. "Will you stay married to me? Not for a year, as the contract stated, but forever. Will you build a life with me, have a family with me, grow old with me? Will you continue being the most incredible partner I could ever ask for?" Halafera's face was wet with happy tears. "Yes, Preston. Yes, to all of it. Forever and always, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger next to the simple band from their contract wedding and stood up to kiss her deeply. When they pulled apart, both were smiling through tears. "I'm going to tear up that contract," Preston said. "I want to renew our vows in front of everyone we love. Do it right this time. With your father walking you down the aisle and my employees as witnesses in a big celebration of real love." "I'd like that," Halafera said softly. "But Preston, that contract brought us together. Maybe we should keep it as a reminder of where we started." "You're right," Preston agreed, pulling her close. "We'll frame it, put it somewhere in our home to remember that even the coldest beginnings can lead to the warmest endings." 6 months later, they renewed their vows in a beautiful ceremony at the Botanical Gardens. Halafera's father, fully recovered and healthy, walked her down the aisle with tears of joy in his eyes. Preston's employees came, many of whom had grown fond of the kind woman who had transformed their demanding boss into someone who smiled. Friends and even a few reconciled business associates attended. This time, when Preston and Halafera exchanged vows, they were promises made with full hearts. When they kissed, it was witnessed by people who loved them and celebrated their unlikely love story. A year after that, Halafera gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Hope. Preston held his tiny daughter in his arms and looked at Halafera with complete awe. "You gave me everything," he said softly. "A family, a real home, a reason to be better. You saved me, Halafera." "We saved each other," she corrected, touching his cheek gently. And it was true. A desperate bookstore clerk and a cold billionaire had made a contract marriage that should have been temporary and emotionless. Instead, they found genuine love that transformed them both. Halafera learned that she was stronger than she knew, capable of standing up to powerful people and fighting for what she loved. Preston learned that opening his heart wasn't weakness, but the greatest strength, and that real wealth wasn't measured in dollars but in love. Their story wasn't conventional. It didn't start with love at first sight or romantic beginnings. It started with desperation, necessity, and a cold business arrangement. But sometimes, the most beautiful love stories grow from the unlikeliest soil. Sometimes, two people who seem completely wrong for each other turn out to be exactly right. Preston never regretted offering that contract, and Halafera never regretted accepting it, because that contract, meant to be temporary and meaningless, became the foundation of a love that would last forever. And in the penthouse that once felt cold and empty, there was now warmth, laughter, love, and a family. The virgin bride who was despised and dismissed had changed everything. She had melted a frozen heart, built a real marriage from a fake one, and proved that love could bloom anywhere, even in the coldest contract. If two people were brave enough to let it grow, and they lived happily, truly, and completely, ever after,